Leopards 2. Russians should be very wary of them. One of the generals once said, "Tanks are the locomotives of history." Paraphrasing Karl Marx's famous expression, "The revolution is the locomotive of history." And you know, the general was right. Looking at history, you clearly understand that it was wars that were its main driving force. And since the 20th century, the tanks determined the winner of the war. The Russian-Ukrainian war has once again confirmed this truth. Now the world is frozen, waiting for a Ukrainian counteroffensive, which many experts say will determine the winner of this war. Ukraine, which lost a lot of its Soviet tanks during this conflict that it inherited after the collapse of the Soviet Union, has managed to largely restore its tank fist thanks to Western assistance, and is going to knock out the Russian army with it. German Leopard 2 tanks are the core of that. Will they live up to the expectations? The stakes are very high. After all, not only the fate of Ukraine will depend on the success of this counterattack, it'll largely determine the outcome of the struggle between the global West, led by the United States, and the global East, led by China. In our previous video about the participation of German Leopard 2 tanks in the Russian-Ukrainian war, we told in detail about this tank and its modifications. The link to it's given in the description of this video. But more than 2 months have passed since then. Many Leopards are already in Ukraine. There's been more clarity on these tanks, so can the Leopards prevail over the Russians in Ukraine or not? To answer this question, 3 determining factors must be considered. The first is the technical characteristics of tanks, especially their resistance to attack factors. The second is the number of tanks. No matter what they say, it's axiomatic that Napoleon said, "God is always on the side of large battalions." Thirdly, the training of service personnel. It's people, not machines, who are at war. Let's begin in order, starting from technical characteristics. The Leopard is a remarkable tank, and it's steadily ranked in the top 3 of the best NATO tanks. But this is true if we're talking about the Leopard 2A5 modifications and above. Their main advantages are good armor protection. The frontal turret projection has the equivalent of 820 to 865 millimeters of homogeneous steel against armor-piercing sub-caliber finned 125 millimeter Russian shells. The side projection of the turret are the equivalent of 690 millimeters homogeneous steel. Such protection would withstand a projectile impact from a distance of up to 1,500 meters. But this is only on the condition that it's a Russian Svinets 2 projectile with tungsten tip, which only their T-90 tanks are armed with. The much more mass-produced T-72s have no such ammunition, and their shells can hit the Leopard 2 from a distance of no more than 1,000 meters. And the characteristics against anti-tank missiles in general are impressive. The equivalent of 1,700 millimeters of homogeneous armor in the frontal projection of the turret and 1,475 millimeters in the side projections. The frontal projection of the hull has the equivalent of 1,279 millimeters. Let me remind you that the most powerful Russian anti-tank missile system, Kornet, has an armor penetration of 1,400 millimeters. That is, the Leopard is practically invulnerable to it. The Leopard 2, starting from A6 modification, has an excellent 120 millimeter cannon of 55 caliber, which fires armor-piercing LKE-2 shells. It has no tungsten or uranium core, but is capable of producing an explosion when penetrated, raising the temperature. Accuracy is high. This type affects any Russian tank except the T-14 Armata at most tactical combat ranges, and is highly likely to result in a detonation of the ammunition. In addition, the MUS active protection system with laser and infrared sensors has been introduced. All this increases the resistance against anti-tank missiles, interference, and smokescreen effect, after which its guidance by the operator is interrupted and it loses its course. In all this splendor, there is one but very significant disadvantage. Ukraine has very few tanks of A5 modification and above. Germany has handed over 18 Leopard 2A6 tanks. True, there was information in the press that in reality not 18 but 50 tanks of this kind were supplied. In addition, Berlin approved the delivery of 178 Leopard 1A5 tanks to Kyiv from the reserves of the defense industry. The old tanks will be supplied in particular together with Denmark and the Netherlands. In total, the German side plans to send over 100 tanks to Ukraine by the first or second quarter of 2024. All other Leopard 2 tanks already delivered by Poland and to be delivered by Spain, Denmark, the Netherlands, Finland, and Norway are outdated modifications of the A4, which have no dynamic protection, have an old-style 40 caliber gun with a high dispersion during firing, and no MUS active protection system. A video has appeared on the internet in which the Ukrainian military is installing the Soviet-era contact dynamic protection system on such tanks. Such protection will protect the tank against old anti-tank missiles and grenade-type Metis-M, Konkurs-M, RPG-7, and RPG-25, but the Russian Kornets and Chrysanthemums will not be able to penetrate such protection. The maximum range at which the Leopard 2A4 can hit Russian tanks is also increasing. Now T-72s and T-80s can hit the Leopard from a distance of 1,500 meters and T-90s from 2,000 meters. True, the A4 has one advantage over later modifications. The tank's weight's about 57 tons. For example, the A5 has almost 60 tons. The A6 has 62 tons, and the engine power is the same, 1,500 horsepower. In the conditions of Ukraine, it may be of great importance. If the ground's not dry enough, the heavy tanks can simply get stuck in the mud or lose mobility significantly. In this case, they'd become easy prey for Russian artillery. Let's summarize the intermediate results on the technical characteristics and the number of Leopard 2 in Ukraine. Their exact number, which will be in the Ukrainian army at the time of the offensive, of course, is classified. The Russian news agency TASS reported that by early April, Ukraine had received 57 of the 293 Western tanks publicly promised by its Western partners. Of these, 18 were A6 modifications and the rest were A4s. Let's be optimistic and calculate that by the offensive, which should take place in late April or early May, the Ukrainian military will have twice as many Western tanks, i.e. 114, but this is catastrophically insufficient. Recall that the Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Valery Zaluzhnyi asked for 300 tanks in December 2022. But since then, dozens more Ukrainian tanks have been destroyed near Bakhmut and other areas of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Of course, the 100-plus Leopard 2s, some of which are A6 modifications, is an impressive force, but it's clearly not enough to break through the deeply echeloned defenses of the Russians, who have dug dozens of kilometers of anti-tank trenches, mined hundreds of square kilometers, and dotted them with dragon teeth, concrete bollards that do not allow a tank to pass. Also, let's not forget that the Ukrainian tanks will be hit by gun artillery, Grad and Tornado multiple rocket launchers, and aviation. It should also be taken into account that in case of serious damage, the Leopard 2s will not be repaired promptly. They'll have been sent to Poland. That is, they will no longer be able to continue to participate in the counteroffensive. Another factor that will not benefit the Ukrainians is the qualification of tank crews. In 1 or 2 months, it's simply impossible to master perfectly such complex equipment as a modern Western tank, which is stuffed with electronics and differs greatly in design from the Soviet and Russian-made tanks that Ukrainians are used to. The incident at the Leopard Training Center at the 10th Polish Armored Brigade in Świętoslaw is vivid proof of this. One Leopard 2A4 tank driven by a Ukrainian crew drove into another Leopard 2A4 tank driven by a Ukrainian crew. As a result, the turret of the second tank was torn off. Fortunately, no one was injured. But we do not want to end this video on a cheerful note. Let's remember how catastrophic the situation looked last summer. Ukrainian troops left Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, and Russian troops controlled large parts of the territories of Kharkiv, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia regions. But the Kharkiv region has already been practically liberated. Kherson has been liberated, and Russian troops have been driven back to the right bank of the Dnipro River. Yes, the Leopards are not enough, but there are also other tanks, English Challenger and French AMX 10RC. There are M113 armored personnel carriers and Bradley and Marder infantry fighting vehicles. There are self-propelled artillery units, Paladin, Caesar, Crab, and PZH 2000. And most importantly, the Ukrainian army has a fighting spirit and a strong determination to reclaim their territories and expel the invaders from their land. So we're sure that everything will be all right for the Ukrainians after all. If you enjoyed the video, please give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. There will be many more interesting stories about modern weapons.